a squared off shoulder here, because it's that contact, shoulder to shoulder, that gives you the lateral strength. Anytime you can improve the quality of the grip on a piece of wood, you're going to get better surface quality. Right? Better surface quality means less sanding. Less sanding means better quality of life. Better quality of life means brighter economic outcome, and improves the democracy for all of us. So just keep that in mind. So here we are. We've got this, and I know that my limit here is about 1 3/4 that I can close these down on. It's optimal to where it grips and there's still a gap here. You don't want those to touch, right? When they make these chuck jaws, they make them in one piece and then they cut them apart into 4 segments. And so this is optimal to grip this. And the cool thing is, this little step right here sits on the face of the chuck. And any lateral force out here is transferred not in between the jaws, which could spread, but to the face of the chuck, so it really provides a lot more stability. This is true of bowl turning as well. And important, if you want to get a good surface quality, use this. Otherwise, what you've got is you're essentially trying to pinch a cylinder in the jaws, and especially if the piece is long, you've got leverage and the lateral force can flex. Okay? So that little bit of a step there that sits on the top of the jaw makes all the difference in the world in terms of surface quality. So the first thing I'm going to do here, this can become the bottom of the box. Also, keep in mind, the goal of this demonstration is not to make a completed box. It's to go through the process. Hopefully that does not include flying objects. But stuff happens, and I want to show you how to deal with issues as they come up. And so one of them is going to be dampening vibration. And if we made this to where it had to be a successful box, then you may not get as much information from it as you would as if we have minor disasters. They're not planned, but they happen. In Mexico, they say, caca pasa, right? So what I'm going to show you is a grip that I use and specific tools that may not be what you're using, because most people go into this, if they want to clean this off, they use a gouge or a scraper. This is a scraper. It's a round nose scraper, but I never use scrapers flat. And this is mostly because of a guy I met in 1982, a guy named Del Stubbs, who put out this phenomenal video at like it was early 80s. It was put out through the Taunton Press. He didn't get a dime for it, I found out later. But it introduced the concept of shear scraping. This is scraping, where you've got the wood coming down. This is end grain, okay? It's the hardest part of the wood, but it's colliding with this edge here. And you've got end grain sort of shavings, but it's not the same as if you put this up at an angle. Notice that the edges are softened here, and I've got a hardened tool rest. And so what I can do here is get a shaving off this. And get a very, very smooth paper. What's doing the cutting here is something you can't see but you can feel. It's a burr on this edge here. Now, if any of you used one of these, this is a cabinet scraper. Okay, those of you who build furniture and such. And it's got a burr on here, and this is an amazing tool. Let's find a stick or something there and try it out. It'll pull up a shaving. Because there's a little burr on the edge of this here. So in cross-section, I'm going to go to the board. When you first buy a scraper, it looks like this. It's square. And then if you polish these edges here, and then hit it with a burnisher, which is a hardened piece of steel, you get this profile, which has got a hook on both sides. It's that little hook that does the cutting. So one way to get a burr is to burnish it, and what happens is the corner gets mushed like this. There's a little bit of resiliency in the steel, and that little burr does the cutting. The same thing will happen when you use an aluminum oxide or a CBN wheel, and it comes toward this, and the particles push most of the metal ahead of them, but they splash up this little wire edge on here. If you've ever heard of the word wire edge, the term, that's something that usually you take off if you're sharpening something like a skew or a knife. But here I deliberately want it. In fact, I'm going to recondition this by holding this. This is a hone. This is like a 1200 grit hone. It's a CBN plate, but you could use a stone. And I'm going to take the burr off by just putting it flat here, like so. And then using my thumb as a pivot, I'm going to bring this up at this angle. This is the grind angle. And what that does is that raises a burr. That's fairly aggressive now. And that little fingernail of steel is what does the cutting here. It doesn't cut very fast, but it cuts incredibly smooth. You'll also notice the grip I'm using is a little unusual. I'm not doing this because the anchor point here past the tool rest is into my body and into the floor. So there's all this wiggliness here. But if I choke up on this and I put it underneath here and I put it hard under the tool rest, I'm pushing down pretty hard, I'm angling it, and my finger on my left hand, never leaves the hand, but I use it as a pivot. I can't move very far, but I can move with great precision. And get a very, very smooth surface here. This is not dust, these are shavings coming out. Okay. It's also a function of RPM, so if I go a little bit faster here, and get a smoother cut. So something like this on a hardwood, like I'm using here, this is a black walnut, I could start sanding it maybe like 220, 320, somewhere in there. And it just saves a lot of effort. Now, the elements of getting a smooth surface are knowing the cutting dynamics, knowing where in the circle you want this to engage. So if you looked closely, you can see the shaving coming off here, off that burr, right? It's tangent here, where the forces are taking the shortest path possible from where the shaving is detaching from the end grain to the tool rest. Again, the job of the tool rest is to take the punch, right? So I've got it very close. There's no chance that there's a lot of extra vibration here. I've got it chucked very well. It's a stout little piece of wood. I'm getting a great surface, minimal sanding. Now, what I want to show you is once you learn those rules, then you know how to break them properly. So now I'm going to break all those rules. Pull the tool rest away. I was spinning the what, about 1500. I'm going to drop it down. Somewhere about 700. Okay. And instead of holding this close here, I'm going to deliberately let the tool vibrate. And instead of working up here, I'm going to work down below it. On the clock face, this will be about 730. So I'm going to deliberately encourage vibration. I'm going to lock this because it will vibrate off. Sounds horrible, right? That's chatter work. Now this was chatter work that's much too violent because it's actually pecking out the wood. It's tearing out the end grain. So what I'm going to do is go back up to higher RPM with the tool rest close and clean that up. And come back with a different tool and get better chatter work. And now this is smooth, it'll be faster. That should get all that texture off of it. And now I'm going to take a tool that is very thin and thereby very flexible. And I'm going to pull the tool rest away. And I'm going to go down here. And it's a function of RPM, pressure, and deflection of the tool. What you're wanting the tool to do is like a diving board. It deflects down and it rebounds and takes a piece off and deflects down and rebounds and takes a piece off in a matter, 1,000 times a second. Well, a lot of times a second. I don't know how many. Here we go. And the way you can tell is the screen, right? So that was held here. I'm going to change the angle of this. I'm going to come up a little bit higher. And now I'll do it out here as well. I'll do it down below. So that's how you get chatter work. Any tool is a chatter tool if you put it in those conditions. You're deliberately causing it to vibrate. Most of the time you want to cancel that vibration. But if you can't fix it, feature it. Any questions? I apologize for the people who heard this all before, including the bad jokes. Okay, so that's a little texture there. I'm going to make it look a little bit better here. I'm going to use a slightly thicker skew if I can find it. There it is.
So a little skew like that is the best thing to use for chatter.
Yeah, and it's a function of its thickness. So for example, the one I used before is actually thinner than this one. Can you see it? So I use this almost exclusively for chatter, whereas this is, I'm actually using it as a skew for cutting. So I'm going to put a couple detail lines in here to make it look intentional. One thing to do chatter with is one thing to look at the neck to do it. And it's very hard to do it toward the center because you don't have a lot of surface area activating the tool. So I can do this here. It almost dives out totally toward the center there because you just don't have enough oscillation in the tool. But we'll leave it at that. So now that's the bottom of the box, and I'm going to cut this off. I like these thin parting tools. Notice they're very tall, and this is like 3/32 or so. I like to sharpen them with a small bevel here, and this has got a very slight hollow grind to it here. And the reason for that is if you have a very slight cove on the top here, you can still touch it up by grinding here on the grinder or honing it. But what that does is it puts the two corners a little bit farther forward and it shears end grain cleaner. It's not plowing across it with the cutting edge parallel to the grain, which as I said before, always produces a rough surface. This actually has two advanced slicing corners, and then the center takes out top good. But essentially, it cuts clean here. So I'm going to part this off to where the lid comes off about there. Now, I'm going to go side to side here, shooting that way and this way, with the light directly above so I can see into the groove. If you're using the parting tool into the dark, you don't know when you're about to go through. So I use my thumb on the side here, and I try to get my wrist and my elbow in a straight line because I have a better chance of this not curving because I'm dropping in like this here. I ride this bevel down as its diameter is diminished, same as any other cutting tool like this. A little bit of clearance on the side there. Now I can see that I'm down to about 3/8 of an inch, down to about 1/4 of an inch, down to about 1/8 of an inch. Okay. So this is going to become the lid. Now one of the things I do a lot of, they make these tools for getting the interior of the box out. You may have heard of them. They're called drill bits. You can turn this out and it would go pretty quickly. But I've been getting these Forstner bits. These are carbide. This particular brand is Freud, but the ones that Grizzly sell are quite good as well. And you can get them in sets. It's usually cheaper that way. And then there's a secondary set that Grizzly sells. It's all the in-between sizes. So usually they jump by eighths in a standard set. The reason I use carbide is because if you use a steel Forstner, their life is about like that. They use a special, I think it's like a lead aluminum alloy, and they burn right away, especially on end grain. So I want to use a quality bit that's going to be able to take the heat. This one, it's just 1 5/8. But part of what is critical for getting a good hole, no matter what you're drilling into, is self-ejector. No, this needs a knock out, doesn't it? Is how your lathe is set up. One of the most common problems with inexpensive lathes is alignment issues with the tailstock. It can be a real problem.
Is this the one?
Thank you. I always clean out the bore on the spindle or the tailstock. I was born with a number 2 Morse taper little finger, and it's handy. So that'll fit in there. This thing is, even though I lubricated it earlier, it's still kind of bad. This is a keyless chuck, which I like. The advantage of using a bit like this is you know that your sides are going to be dead vertical, parallel with the axis. And that's critical. If you turn boxes and you've got any kind of taper one way or the other, it's really hard to get a good fit, especially if your tenon is short. And it's nearly impossible to get this kind of fit any other way, except by drilling. The sequence for drilling something like this is, this interior bore is, I think, 1/8". Yeah, 1/8". So I will come down a half size, like a 1/16 inch smaller, and I'll take the bulk of it out, and then I'll slightly taper the entrance, and I'll come back in with the actual final size, and I'll do a couple things. One is I'll drop the RPM, make sure the bit starts inside the beveled entrance to where it aligns, because sometimes your tailstock is off, especially if you've got a lathe like a lot of these. None of these have a movable headstock, but it's almost impossible to get the headstock lined up perfectly. Even expensive lathes like Robust or Jet, it's difficult to get those points exactly right. So the other thing that I do always when I drill on the lathe is I always start by putting a divot on center. Right here. So I'm going to clean this off here. The screw function is a knife, and now I'm going to use it as a scraper and just put a little divot there. And that's enough to locate the drill bit tip to where it will go straight. It's a little thing, but details like this matter. Then I'm going to drop the RPM because these generate a lot of heat, and I don't want to stress this too much. So I'm going to bring this tailstock close. Make sure you lock it. Get in the habit of whenever you lock your tailstock and you get cranking something, put your finger right here. You can feel if the tailstock is slipping. But the other quandary is you've also got to hold on to this chuck. Because if you retract, it could pull out of the Morse taper, and that's terrible. So we're going to go in slow. It's probably going to squeal. You'll notice that it's cutting evenly. Shavings are coming out both sides, which is a good sign that the cutters are even. Sometimes you get a cheap force through bit, and they only come off to one side. The other thing is you can't go very deep with the force through bit, especially if you're going down in a narrow hole. And the reason for that is this shoulder here, because the shavings will bunch up in here, and the heat from the cutting action will make them expand, and you can drill in and you can't get the bit out. And it's not the artistic sculpture that you think it might be. It's just kind of frustrating. It'll lock itself in there. So I'm going to go a little bit farther. I just wanted to show you that I'm getting slight ridges here, and part of that is because this is stiff, and there's a little bit of twist to the tailstock, and I also didn't have this lock. So this locks the spindle. Most people don't use this, but if you tweak down on it just a little bit, it takes the tolerances a little bit tighter in the ram as it comes out of the tailstock. So now we're going to drill a little bit farther. That's too stiff. Now that's a lot of end grain, and it's an amazing amount of heat that can build up. And the carbide can take it. Plus, while it's still hot, I'll take paraffin and I'll melt it on here, and that reduces the friction further. You get a slightly better surface. But that's going to be good enough for this. So now I know I have a nice clean interior. It's not the best surface, but I can clean it up a little bit. Any questions so far? Comments? Cries of anguish.
I have a question back on your parting tool.
Yes.
You talked about the hollow grind.
Yes.
How do you produce that hollow grind?
I produce that hollow grind by, imagine that this is the grinding wheel. Okay? My grinding wheels have a radiused corner. So I can hold it at a corner like this on just the top, like so. Another way to do it is using a hone that's actually intended for fish hooks. Okay? Okay, this is a little thing you can get for about $8 or $9. It's got some kind of abrasive powder, possibly diamonds. Diamonds are a guy's best friend. And in a little holder here, I don't know how many of you actually sharpen your fish hooks, but you could. And this can be used, the radius of this can be used probably this side. And it's just a little bit here, enough to get that, if you don't have a radiused wheel. You can also get small grindstones that fit into a Dremel, and then use your diamond wheel dresser, if you still have one from aluminum oxide wheels, and you can actually crown that little wheel and just go down the center of it. So it's a minor detail. Try it on a bigger party tool, like an 1/8 inch party tool. I actually might pass this one around. You can see that there's a radius on this one as well. Is it there still? Yeah, it's here. It's very slight, but that cuts a lot cleaner. We can pass it around if you want to. Any other questions? I know I'm getting into minutiae here, but it's definitely detailed. Now, there's something that happens when you're trying to clean off this end grain. You've left the mark of the Forstner bit, okay? And there's a couple things you can do. You can turn it out. This isn't that far. It's not even an inch deep there. And I can come in there with even the same scraper that I had before, the round-nosed one here. And if I'm careful and I set up my tool rest exactly to where I'm cutting its center line, can you see in there okay? Okay. And then I can get a shaving off of there. I'm using this as a pivot, my fingertip, and the underhand grip here, and I can come across the bottom there, like so. I'm sure you can't see that cut, but does that help at all?
Yes.
So I'm going across the end, and I can get that point divot out of there. Again, I'm not flat, I'm up at an angle here. And I can get that nice and clean. I'm a little more RPM. And I'm shearing across end grain and getting a really good surface there. Okay? Now, I'm barely going to twist the inside here because I want to leave this straight as possible. So I'm just going to barely touch that here. Typically, I would not use a tool like this to do that. A better way to go is to take the skew here, and I'm going to use the smaller one, and take a moment to get this exactly at the right place to where you're at center here, and the tool is horizontal, parallel with the bed of the lathe, right there. Lock this. Now you use your finger as a stop, and you come in exactly at center, and I'm just going to barely shave off like 64th of wood here. And I'm going to sight the top of this parallel with the line of this, so I can visually line this up. I don't want to go at an angle either way. I'm going to go right here, and I'm very careful. Follow it all the way. That'll maintain the straightness there, but clean off the rawness of these spurs. Now, it's still got a little roughness to it, so this is where I get into some sanding tricks. Let me see if I have my tools here. So I make up these sanding sticks. I've got a bunch of them, it's just a matter of where are they. And the abrasives I use are all cloth-backed. I get these from Klingspor. You can buy this in rolls. It's cloth-backed. And here's the thing about abrasives is, this is 220 grit, and I wrote it on here. This is an older piece. I just got a new order of abrasives, and what I use is I take a spring clamp, and I take this roll. I buy them usually 10 or 25 yards of abrasive. I get 2-inch more commonly. I have been getting 4-inch in the coarser grits, like 180 and 220. I take a spring clamp, and I clamp it to something, and I walk backwards with a spray can, and I color code the back of this, like, however long it is. So now, sometimes you get the numbers on a piece of abrasive are this far apart, and you should never pick up a piece of sandpaper if you don't know what grit it is, right? So as everyone knows, the international color coding is 220 is blue, 180 is yellow, 320 is orange, 400 is green, okay? Or whatever you chose. But this way, even a small piece, and I'm constantly tearing things off here, and then I put it in this holder, so let's find which one fits this. This has to be undersized, so this one is just about right. And I put a slit in it. You can't do this with a bandsaw. You've got to use like either a Japanese pull saw or some small fine blade, and then you'll know which way to wrap it pretty quickly. And it just goes like this, like a flag, okay? And you dial down your RPM, and I've turned this to where this is as straight as I can make it, and this is how I sand the interior. Remember, if you round it, you're going to lose your fit, right? So much depends on box fit, having the interior of the lid to be vertical. The thing that we don't realize is that, you notice how I'm keeping this moving. When you sand something, all that swarf in there, all the dust is packing into that surface, and it's heated. And sometimes, if there's a little bit of resin in the wood, it'll melt to the abrasive. There's this stuff that I use. I've been using this for years. It's called Agronet. Here it is. Okay, I want to show you something. I'm going to sand the outside of the box. Now, this stuff you can see right through, right? So it comes right through, but look how much dust will come off. This is only 240 grit. You can see how much dust is packed in there. If you just sit on that pile of dust, it's working against you. It's burnishing into the surface. Like I said, death by detail, right? But that's essentially how I get a smooth interior surface there. This is shallow enough that I can also chatter this because I can reach the tool in there. You get past 1.5 inches or so, you can't do it. So there's another trick. How are we doing on time? Are we halfway?
Yeah, pretty close to half.
Okay. So I'm going to do one other thing to clean up this surface because this was done with a parting tool and these fibers are not cut so clean. So a cleaner cut would be with the skew. Keeping the tool rest very close, making sure I'm using a nice sharp skew. And this is where your thumb plays an important role. This grip is something that if you've not used it with the skew, I highly recommend it. I learned this a long time ago where your index finger goes underneath and your thumb works as a stop and your 3 fingers close over the tool. And you're not going down the shank of the tool, you're going tangent to the bevel. So that bevel, as the tip drops in like so, pulls up a shaving. And I'm not going to finish it from the other side, I'm just going to raise up the bevel. Very thin shaving here. No dust. And I'm going to stop right there, because now I'm going to come back in from the other side. If I went through the interior, it would fold in, and I break the fibers. So now I'm going to come back with a shear straight. Again, not held flat at an angle, and I'm going to touch it here, and I'm still getting shaving. And now I have a nice smooth surface. Those little details keep the fibers from folding in, and that's nice and clean. Doesn't need sanding, at least at this point. Okay. That contact on the edge of the lid to the shoulder of the box tenon makes a difference. You don't want a gap. I don't like to undercut it because if you sand the interior, it turns into a gap. And if you do it this way, of course, the gap's there forever. Right? So I think I spoke earlier about boxes being about details and interfaces. So for example, on this box, I added a little bead here because that'll cover his shoulder. Minor, I know, but this way, this is really clean. This was cut with a skew, like this. And this was very carefully sized with a bidon, a smaller bidon, it's a 1/4 inch wide, and I kept checking it with calipers. I will get into getting exact measurements for maintaining exact diameters. But this was also something that I did by fit. So I'll slightly taper the tenon, which you'll also see when I start the bottom part of the box, and I sneak up on it. I never cut a flat cylinder, a cylinder parallel with the axis. I always bevel this. See how the lid starts. Get a burnished mark on there, and you can tell that's the diameter you want, and then continue that over. Because you know if you've made boxes, you get a little too tight, a little too tight, a little too tight, too loose. Right? So that little bevel makes a big difference if you get into that. How about a 10-minute break? And then I'll set up with some quick images and we'll finish the box. Or come close. Good. Do we do show and tell?
Usually show and tell at the end.
How can we do?